What is up, my trunk slaying friends? It is Monday. That means it is Spicy Monday. I gotta be honest with you, on this Monday, I'm not really feeling that spicy. So I thought we could spend some time talking about our emotions, and I'm just kidding. Your finances suck and you're tracking them wrong. Let's get into it. At our MSPs, at our service businesses, we are tracking a variety of financial accountability metrics. And even if you're not tracking them, you're at least entering the raw data to be able to track them, I hope. There are a lot of ways to look at our finances in either that shorter term view or that longer term view that all of us do. The point of the video is not to tell you that some of the basic ways you've been doing that for years are wrong. They're not wrong. They could be better. You could be thinking about this better. And I want to give a couple of ideas today on some common finance measurements that you might be able to approach thinking about a little bit differently or tied to some other data that you don't normally tie it to. All right, a brief trigger warning. I am going to make an analogy and I am going to use physics and engineering. So if that traumatizes you, I want you to go grab your college ruled spiral notebook now, so that you have something you can cry into to collect those tears as you sit over there shaking from the memories I am about to unlock. You may remember back to your freshman year physics class if you had to take that. One of the first things that you have to do is you have to basically learn how the equation works to calculate the speed of a car. And they use this to present to you this idea of there are largely two types of variables we use in physics or engineering: scalar variables and vector variables. First, let's define what a scalar and a vector are, because they're going to illustrate the two concepts of how I want you to start thinking more about the financial reporting you're using at your MSP. So the simplest definition I can give you is that a scalar quantity only measures the magnitude of something. That's it. We have lots of examples of this. You got a thermometer somewhere, that is a scalar quantity. You got a measuring tape somewhere, that is a scalar quantity. You got a scale somewhere. You might not like what it says, but that is a scalar quantity. And generally speaking, and I am generalizing, so actual physics nerds don't come at me. This isn't a video for you. Calm down. Generally speaking, any measurement device that you can hold in meat space that just measures one thing and doesn't do any math to arrive at that measurement, that is a scalar. And most of the data that we input at our MSPs and the sort of basic financial math that most of us are doing or have been taught to do really falls into that sort of scalar context. Now, a vector, on the other hand, in physics is really kind of cool or frustrating, depending on how much you like physics. A vector combines measuring the magnitude of something with then also measuring basically its direction. Well, in math, it means that if I take a scalar concept like speed and now I add distance, a vector and that scalar combined together, we get something like velocity, which can be used to do other stuff, those curves you plot where you shoot a cannon, or, you ever played like Battletoads or something, you know what I'm talking about. That's vector math as opposed to scalar math. But the point is that a vector calculation has direction included in with the magnitude measurement. Now, some of you might be saying, okay, that makes sense to me. I get that. So if I take a scalar quantity and I plot it consistently over time, that must turn it into a vector, right? And well, I get why you said that, but no, it doesn't. And that's important. That's the mental leap I was hoping some of you would make, because it's going to explain why some of the data you're currently collecting at your MSP, RE finances, even if you're plotting it over time and then looking at that plot afterwards for trends, that is good. I'm not telling you that's bad, but you could be doing more or different. To give a meat space example I know you are all familiar with, in every car you have ever driven, there is a speedometer, and that speedometer tells you how fast you're going at any point. And that is a scalar, that gauge is displaying a scalar quantity, speed. Physics people, get off my back. I know we can have a conversation, but there's more to it. So that gauge gives you a scalar quantity. The minute we add in GPS or a compass and combine it with that and say we're traveling a particular speed in a particular direction, it becomes a vector quantity. And of course, that is important because that speedometer does not care if you're traveling northeast, southwest, up or down, reverse. It doesn't care. It just shows you the speed. And a lot of those MSP financial data points we enter also don't really care in and of themselves what direction things are going in. It's just a point in time quantification, and we want that direction, right? We all use GPSs now because having that direction combined with the speed, that tells us how long it's going to take us to get to our destination with a bunch of other factors, involved. Kind of awesome. We want that same thing exactly at your MSP. Let me give you a great example of why everything I'm saying matters, why you're being forced to learn physics on a Monday. So in that car example we talked about, another really common measurement, another scalar quantity we have is horsepower. That's the ability of the car to basically do work. When you look at how you come up with a measurement like horsepower, the ability of the car to do work, well, all work scalar quantities in physics are arrived at by taking two vector quantities and dot producting them together. If you don't know what that means, that's fine. They take them and we boop them together and we get a new measurement. So in the case of the horsepower of your car, we're taking force, which is a vector quantity, and we are taking distance traveled, which is a vector quantity, and we're together, and now we have horsepower. So horsepower lets you interpret that speed conversation differently, because obviously a car that has lower horsepower trying to go up a hill with a heavy load is going to have a different speed than one that doesn't have those conditions. And you'll notice that a lot of the examples I'm giving here are very similar to basic financial measurements. Gross profit, net profit, gross margin, net margin. These are all pretty much the scalar equivalent of these types of measurements in finance. But to get to them, we need some vector. We need some vector finance that we're booping together to arrive at that scalar output. And so that's why you just had a physics lesson, because I wanted to illustrate that idea for anybody that wasn't already confused. And hopefully now that you are the most confused possible, let's get into the part that you actually care about. There's some basic stuff you are probably tracking at your MSP, and I want you effectively to think of these as scalar quantities. There is no direct one-to-one comparison of scalar and vector in finance, but just as a thought experiment. These are magnitude-only measurements. They don't really contain any other directional information in them. We have our cost of goods sold, right? That's the cost of everything that we need to directly deliver our services. Then we have our, recurring revenue rate. Whether we do that on a monthly or a yearly basis, that's the summation of all of our recurring revenue, and that's a wonderful number. And we use those things and we arrive hopefully at our gross profitability, right? So we take our total revenue, which is probably our recurring revenue. You're subtracting your total COGS for that same period of time, the total cost to deliver that, and you're ending up with gross profitability. You did a thing. And my guess is that most of you are able to track that, hopefully. And as to whether or not that's accurate, well, you can self-admonish if that's not as accurate as it could be, because that's a really easy one to get right. A couple other ones. So maybe you go, all right, that's fine, Dean, but I'm smart. So maybe you're doing something like average revenue per user. You're going in and you've calculated the total number of users you're supporting over all your users or over whatever block or banding we calculated that revenue for before, and you're dividing the revenue by the number of users, and that gives you an idea of your average per user revenue. That's a great number to track. Some of you are probably tracking stuff like EBITDA, at least you should be. And once again, very simple. We're taking all those expenses and we're subtracting them from our revenue. And you'll notice most of these are very basic equations. We are taking a financial scalar quantity, something we're measuring magnitude only, that's pretty easy to quantify. We might not be doing a great job of chopping it into individual buckets to be able to quantify it per department, but that's a different video's problem. But we can quantify it, and then we subtract something or we divide something. It's very basic here. There's not a lot of thinking going on. Let's get a little bit more fancy. Let's stop looking at only scalar quantities when we're measuring our financial performance. Let's start adding direction into that. if you were to take a fairly straightforward but slightly more strategic metric around your finances, like your effective rate, a common way to calculate that might be saying we take our monthly contract value. If you're really smart, your monthly contract value, stripping out any product resale as part of that contract value, and divide that by the number of hours spent over the course of that month. That'll give you a very basic version of your effective hourly rate for that client. If I deliver 10 hours of work over the course of a month, the dollar value in that contract comes out where that was approximately $150 an hour, then my effective rate is $150 an hour. I think everybody understands that basic concept, and you've probably heard it used before, either on a individual staff member basis or on an individual company basis. And there's really nothing wrong with it, but there's a lot you can't think about. It doesn't have direction. It doesn't have momentum. It doesn't allow you in the moment to make good decisions. It is a really good lagging indicator, but it doesn't really tell you a lot. And if you think about this, back to some of our examples before, if the thermometer outside says today it's 34 degrees Fahrenheit, I know it's cold. It's like, I'm not dumb. Just like if your effective hourly rate says that you bill at $150 an hour, you're not dumb. You know that you're billing at $150 an hour, but what does that mean? And like in the case of my thermometer, well, usually the news tells me other stuff like the wind chill, how sunny it's going to be, how moist it's going to be, because all of those other calculations together end up being what really determines what kind of coat I'm going to wear and for how long. And in the same way, knowing a little bit more about exactly what that effective rate is doing allows you to do more, and it allows you to think more critically. So an example of that might be efficiency. So rather than looking over a month at the effective hourly rate as billed against a client agreement, what if I looked at the agreement efficiency? So in this case, it takes into consideration the value of an hour of work could be different depending on the person who is executing it, which at a decently run MSP, which is all of you, you are probably tracking that in your PSA based on how the person entering time enters that time, what codes they use. They cost you different. We know that. We know different people have different costs. So obviously, you do not have a fixed $150 effective hourly rate. You don't really have a rack rate the way we used to say when this industry switched from T&M. That's not really true from a strategic accounting perspective, from a vector math standpoint. Yeah, the output might be like when we talked earlier about horsepower, but in reality, there's a lot more to it. So I really like the idea of measuring efficiency better. Efficiency, if you want to compare it more simply, if your effective hourly rate is how much you effectively get paid per hour for the work you do, well, your efficiency is going to give you a way better idea of what you get paid versus the value of what you did. So a typical way to calculate an efficiency ratio, you take your total invoiced labor over that period of time. And for this case, what we really mean, total amount of labor if you were pretending you were invoicing for all of it directly. So whatever your discounts, math, and modifiers are, apply all of that and basically pretend that the agreement itself was an all-you-can-eat agreement that absorbs 0 hours, but otherwise all the other discounts and calculations and things you'd put into it were in play. What's the total amount you could have sent someone a paper invoice for if you were explicitly billing for all work performed over that period of time? That's your shadow billable, because you're not actually billing it. I first grabbed that term from MSP CFO. I don't know if that's their term or an industry term. You take that and you divide that by the value of the labor, which we calculate by the hours times the billable rate that the agreement covered. And that ends up giving you a way more interesting calculation. So let me give you an example of this. If I have a technician and they record 4 hours of time at that $150 rate we talked about earlier, that's $600 of shadow billable. That's $600 of time that I could invoice. Whether or not I do is a different story, but that I could invoice. If the actual invoiced labor is $500, because remember, this is going against an agreement. And so the actual invoice labor is the labor portion of the agreement the client is paying for. So if the actual invoice labor is only $500, that's an efficiency ratio of 0.83. That gets you an efficiency ratio. I used to use a wonderful tool called MSPs to calculate this for me. You can do the same thing with Cognition 360. You can do the same thing with Frictionless IT's Fitware. You can build it yourself. I'm sure there are other tools I'm not aware of, but efficiency is kind of cool because when you look at efficiency, remember, we want direction and we want to be able to make decisions and we want to be able to make good judgments about where we are at shorter intervals in time rather than having to wait and plot those scalar measurements all the way through a year at the end of the year to find out that our effective rate wasn't where it needed to be. It's too late to do anything about it. I want to know now. And so something like efficiency calculated on a monthly basis gives you a number. And I'm generalizing here, but a 1.0 efficiency, that effectively means you are breaking even on that agreement. Anything from a 0.8 to a 1.0 means you're losing a little bit of money, but if your agreement has other things in it, which our agreements typically do, we have hardware resale, software resale, other services and shit, you are probably okay. If your agreement efficiency is between a 1.2 to a 1.3.5, you are probably making the right amount of profit. And if your efficiency is too high, like a 1.5 to maybe a 2.0, you're probably making too much profit, which sounds weird, but it usually equates to a lack of value perception on the client part. That's a far more useful strategic way to calculate the same concept as just my effective hourly rate when we're measuring over a similar time period. And it starts to let you do other stuff, which is why I like it better. One of the important things that efficiency does that effective hourly rate doesn't really. It's very challenging to break out effective hourly rate in a short-term period of time on a per client, per agreement, or per user or node basis. It's not impossible, but the amount of work that would go into calculating that just is not practical. Efficiency is much easier to calculate in the short term, so you can make decisions with it before stuff gets to a point where it's so upside down you're screwed. So an example is you review efficiency with account management, never mind service, review with account management. And an account that is running too lean or too hot, that's something account management needs to get involved with. You pull service reports into this. So this is where we're getting, and we're taking two vector calculations and we're going to boop them together to get a number or a calculation we can work with. If I am now taking my agreement efficiency number, especially if it's not where I want it to be, and I start comparing that against service KPIs, like my average resolution time, my average first response time, first contact res rate, the resource utilization or billability rate, the open or closed tickets ratio, any of those types of things, the total number of tickets that came in, total number of tickets that came in a certain category. Now I take those two data points and I put them together and I suddenly have context. And that context, now I have a magnitude and a direction. I know what is likely causing that efficiency to be where it is, and I don't have to wait for a year to figure it out, and I can start making decisions. Hey friends, this video is getting a little long, so I'm going to chop it up, make a second video that talks about some of that decision making and some additional service level KPIs that you can use to add to these financial metrics you're tracking to make better real-time decisions at your MSP in a demonstrable way that you can see the result of in a short term, because really that's what I think we all want. In the meantime, I just want you to think a little bit about how you're applying and measuring data currently. Are you measuring it at its most basal simple layer with that sort of scalar style math or magnitude only? Or are you thinking about it like a vector quantity in physics where we are measuring magnitude and direction, where we have intent, we have momentum, we have something behind that magnitude that adds additional context? Because really that's what we all want at our MSPs. Let me know in the comments if you're already doing that or some cool ideas or ways you've leveraged that. And keep an eye out for the next video, which will go into a little bit more on how to use this. Thanks, everybody. Stay spicy.